Greetings gamers, Tim here again, and I wanted to do a Game Designer 101. Most notably, a friend recommended I do it after I mentioned that I was facepalming over a game designer talking about their game and hitting a common roadblock that I've seen in a lot of tabletop role-playing games. This may happen to novelists, it may happen to cartoons or movies or a billion other things, but what I know about, what I have experience with, is tabletop role-playing and publishing. Now, I've published 2 tabletop games, High Valor, a Dark Ages fantasy role-playing game, and Hearts and Souls, a superhero role-playing game that's a little odd. I like the term odd rather than saying unique, because I don't know that it's unique, but I do know that it's odd, at least for me. I love it. But it is very different from a lot of things that I've seen out there. Maybe not everyone, and that's okay. But the things I'm going to cover are basic steps to try and save you heartache, save you wasted money, save you time, and get the best games to market that you possibly can if you're a game designer. Now, these are my opinions. You can find other opinions on the web, I'm sure. These are, take them with a grain of salt. They're free. So they are what you pay for them. But I do have experience in doing this. I did not use Kickstarter, so I don't have a lot of experience with that yet. But if you have questions about it, I will look and help find answers if necessary. Now, my Game Designer 101, I'm starting with 3 simple lessons. Lesson 1, and an important lesson I have for you, is write what you love. First and foremost, even though there will be some rules that seem to contradict it, they really won't. But the first lesson, the first rule, so to speak, is write what you love. Because I have been criticized, I have gotten feedback, and I have gotten all sorts of problems from people who didn't understand what I was writing, didn't understand the language that I was using, didn't understand elements of the game I was writing, but I was happy with it. And I realized that you can't make everyone happy. So since you can't make everyone happy, since the only person you can make happy is yourself, make yourself happy. Write what you want. First and foremost, that is the general rule by which all of this should be taken. Give or take some other minor things. The reason for this, I just was talking to a game designer friend who's put out a free game, who's reviewed one of my games. He's an awesome guy, and he was talking about how he was getting negative feedback because he wanted to change somebody else's rule set that they had basically told him he was writing for. They basically hired him, so to speak, to write a genre book for their game. And he couldn't find something that specifically fit into its Lego blocks to build the right shape. And anything he would do to change that builds a complex thing around it that makes it more complicated than he'd like, probably. Now, that's fine, but I sat down and told them this, and that's one reason I'm sharing it with you. I also had a friend mention that I should do this after facepalming over another game designer's chat that I was participating in. Because I saw him hit that roadblock, and it's so frustrating because I know it's coming. And I want them to veer left, and they hit it head on at 100 miles an hour. Now, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. High Valor doesn't have the support I'd like. I should have focused on it instead of working on Hearts and Souls 2nd Edition. Because I had momentum, I could have done it, and I dropped the ball. But now I'm so far into Hearts and Souls 2nd Edition that, well, it's where I am. So I make mistakes. So use my experience to help you. Now, as I said, write what you love. That's important. Very important. Because you cannot please the other 7 billion people in the world, 100 million people in your country or more, or maybe less if you're in a tiny country. You can't please them. So please yourself. Make yourself happy. Because in the long run, you're going to have to live with that game a lot longer than somebody who didn't like it. Especially if you don't like it. You're going to have to live with it a lot longer. So write what makes you happy. Lesson or suggestion number 2, so to speak. Be familiar with role-playing games. not just role-playing games, but if you are a creative individual, if you want to be familiar with anything and be creative, make yourself intimately familiar with as much of the material you're wanting to work around and with as possible. I don't just mean the tools. I mean read games, play games, lots of them, not just derivatives of the same system. You know, try things you've never played before. If all you've played is Dungeons and Dragons and you want to write a game, go out immediately. If you have the money, find a new game, find some new gamers, try it. Something that's not related to D&D at all. Or if all you've played is Fate, or if all you've played is whatever, go out and find something new. Every author I've ever spoken with, and I've spoken with a lot because I used to work in a bookstore, and we did many author signing events, and every single one I talked to said read. With books, you can get away with that. With games, you can't just read the game and understand how it all works. You get an idea, a clear idea most of the time, but actually seeing it interact with the people in your table, that's important. Very important. You learn a lot more about the game seeing it function than you do just reading it. And I truly believe that you should go out and play before you ever decide that this is your game you're going to publish, even if you've written it. Go out and play a half a dozen games that are completely different in design from your own, from anything else you've ever played, and get that knowledge, get that experience, make it work for you. Last one, play your own game. Don't just write it, send it out, and get it published. Play it. Play it a lot. That may mean, combined with being familiar with other people's games, that may mean spending 2 years getting your game out. But I will tell you, I will be honest, there is nothing so innovative that you have thought of that it can't wait 2 years. And you don't even need 2 years if you can do one shots or whatever. You might manage it in 6 months. But be familiar with other people's works. Be familiar with your own. It's very important that when you write it, when you put it down, you run it exactly how it's written. You get people who are not your friends to run it and try it and give you feedback. Get your friends to do the same thing, particularly your good friends who know how to tell you those pants look awful on you, or your haircut's stupid, simply because, let's be honest, the kind of friend who will be honest with you is more important than the other kind any day of the week. These things are important. These 3 things are the most important things I can get to you. So start with them. There'll be more we talk about later, but start with those 3 things. Because I honestly want your games to succeed. Seriously. I want to see thousands of role-playing games on the market that are all interesting and fun and have tons of fans. And don't make me facepalm when I get to that one section of the book or that one problem rule that has been defeated in a dozen other games that this person just wasn't aware of a good solution for. So, you know, come on, you can do it. I believe in you. I do believe. I did it. I wrote 2 games. I'm working on a 2nd edition. And I've got half a dozen other games and novels in the works. Novels actually came before the games, but let's not go there because I'm very critical of my own work. But I believe you can do it. So do these 3 things. Get them into your heart and into your head. And then go out and create the game you want, or finish the game you want. And love it. You know, and don't, lastly, it's just a piece of advice, don't take criticism too harshly. Sometimes it's a matter of taste. Sometimes it's a matter of things not working. Pay attention to the people who say things aren't working, but the people who tell you something sucks without details, ignore them. I had people tell me that the words I was using were too complex and they couldn't understand them. Well, considering it was supposed to be a foreign, a non-English language, that was generally the intent, unless you spoke the language I was using. And that's kind of the idea. I mean, you have to make it clear, but we're talking about city names and people's names. We're not talking about rules functions. So, make sure your rules functions are clear. Make sure you've played them. Make sure other people play them. Make sure you're familiar with a lot of games out there. Genres, settings, rules, and write what you love. Those are important. Everything else is just tweaking that, in my opinion. And I started writing games in 2005, and I've only published 2 games. I know people that in that time have published 4 or 5, and I know people who've only ever published 1. But the important thing is writing what you love, making sure it fits those rules, and going forward. Now, I've got some other things that I make as a suggestion. As a suggestion, but not as a hard lesson or rule. Don't assume an audience. I've seen it happen with cartoons, with comics, with novels. If you wrote a book for 9 to 12-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-old boys and 30-year-old women are 30-year-old women are loving your book, go with it. Love those 30-year-old women who enjoy your book, because they will sell your book for you. It's not as common in role-playing games, but don't assume an audience. And by that, don't assume a gender, don't assume a sexuality, don't assume an age group. If you're trying to write a game for kids and you're aiming to be a little simpler, that's one thing. You're trying to keep things to a certain level of education and information and knowledge. That's a little bit different. But don't assume that that's the only people who are going to play your game. I've seen kids' games played by 40-year-old men and loved them. I've seen kids' novels read by dozens and dozens of 35-year-old women. Harry Potter, most notably. And they loved them. They weren't reading them for their kids, they were reading them for themselves. And that's the important thing. Don't assume an audience. Don't discriminate between any of those things. Try and step lightly when you're talking about religion or politics in a game. It should, it's fiction. Sometimes that fiction is close to reality, but try and step lightly, because there are going to be people who feel you've stepped on something important to them, something that matters to their personal identity. But if you step lightly, the worst you can say is, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way." If you trod through their beliefs roughshod, through their sexualities or their gender biases, God help you. Because they will let you know. They will seethe and let you know. So, these are my suggestions. I will probably do some more of these as things come up. If you ask questions, I can get a better idea of what you want to know and who I can go ask questions of. I might even get a couple people I know to shoot their own videos, and hopefully we'll improve gaming for everyone. You, me, everyone who writes games, as well as everybody who plays games. Peace and good gaming.